It is time to drill, baby, drill.
Drill, baby, drill.
Very personal. As he finishes up his second term,
And let's get going. It's time to
drill, baby, drill.
I'm your host, Jake Merrick, and tonight we're bringing you a no-holds-barred discussion with a panel of top-notch experts who aren't afraid to tackle the toughest issues facing Oklahoma, from energy independence to education, Second Amendment rights to economic growth. We're going to drill down to uncover the truth, find real solutions, and fight for the values that make our state strong. So buckle up and let's get going. It's time to
drill, baby, drill.
All right, let me introduce my first guest here. We'll just make our way around from left to right. Okay. I got Roberta Lewis with, well, so many things. What do you not do, Roberta? Moms for Liberty, you are working on so many things, and we've talked so many times. I love your work, and I love your heart for the state and for children of Oklahoma. You've got a powerful story. We're going to get to that in just a second, too. But making our way around the table, we have Miss Katy Smith with Visit V1SUT. I always spell that out so you know. V1SUT. Visit. You can find her great work on Substack, doing amazing things. You talk about deep dives into particular issues. This is what Katy specializes in. And Katy, you've written a hard-hitting article just recently on the topic we're going to discuss tonight, which is child welfare and DHS. We're going to dig into that, and we're going to highlight your great story. Thank you for joining us. But helping us with that is Mandy Reed on the right, and, of course, founder of Oklahoma for Children's Rights Incorporated, a dedicated patriot, deeply passionate about the judicial process. I can vouch for that. I mean, I liked when I introduced her or talk about her, I say she's a bulldog. I mean, she goes after it. We worked together on some legislature when I was in the Senate, but you are working hard on DHS reform and advocating for fair and just legal systems while championing the protection and empowerment of children, upholding the principles of liberty. And wrapping it up, I have Mr. Darren Dougherty with a child's worth and advocating for healthy children and families through better opportunities. You yourself also have a powerful story. And because of your experience, you are going after it. You're going after answers, exposing darkness, and fighting for righteousness in the state, the welfare of children. Again, I can vouch for all of that. Appreciate your work and appreciate you being here tonight.
Thanks, sir.
You bet. All right. Well, these are the panel of experts. I consider all of you experts because of both your personal experience and then the work you've done since then. So I appreciate your time. I know that you, the listening audience, you're going to get so much out of this. And if you're like us, you want answers, especially to when it comes to children in Oklahoma. I know I adopted out of DHS. That's when we were first introduced to the brokenness of the child welfare system here in Oklahoma. And to start this discussion out, I think you would like to hear and need to hear the stories from 3 parents and step-parents that have been confronted with the harsh reality of the brokenness of the system here in the state. So again, we'll just start right over here left to right. And this is also open for discussion. As you can see, the format is fairly loose. And we want to have just a free and fair discussion about all of the issues we discuss. Tonight is child welfare and DHS reform. Roberta, I know we could talk for a week on your experience, but in just a few minutes, if you could catch people up on what you experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people know my story, but for the ones that don't, I was thrown into this world in 2021 when my 14-year-old son made a video online. It wasn't anything nefarious. It was a simple video, and the video had a gun in it. And so the school took it upon themselves to call DHS on me. They called law enforcement on me. They, and my son was charged with domestic terrorism, and he was charged with threats and intimidation.
And 14 years old, right?
14 years old.
Okay.
Never been in trouble. I've never seen the back of a cop car. I've never been in handcuffs.
Now, was he shooting this gun? I mean, what was the video about?
So what he was doing is he just took it apart, put it back together. It was an antique gun. It was a collector's gun, and it was something that I had just recently got. and he was proud of it. And so, that's what he did. He made a video.
Now, was the culture in your family? I mean, you guys collect guns, obviously, and he was obviously familiar with it, comfortable with it.
Yes.
So, I mean, talk to me just briefly about the culture in your home, as far as like, where are the boundaries? How are guns kept, and things like that?
I believe you're a military vet,
So
correct?
we're a military family.
Makes a difference, yeah.
We're a military family. I'm a veteran. My son's dad is a veteran. My oldest son, he's 25. He's a veteran and a police officer. And so we play with guns in our family. From a young age, if you can walk, you're in the woods hunting in the fall. In the springtime, you're out there looking for turkey. And so guns are not anything. You come to my house, you're going to see a gun. And that's
Right.
how it is.
Well, I think the audience that's listening to this show and so far has stayed tuned, even with this picture behind me, that they too probably collect guns and play with guns. I was the same way. I mean, we lived out in the country, so we'd carry our shotguns and just go hunting on a regular basis. No big deal. Some people, though, that may be foreign to them. Maybe they're raised in town. They were never raised around guns, and so guns can be a trigger for them, almost triggering anxiety and fear. And it's such a foreign concept to play with guns.
Yes. Yeah. And so the counselor at his school, who actually moved here from California, it was her first year here, 2021. She was here from California, and she was so appalled by the fact that I would let my child even be around a gun. And, she called law enforcement, and they launched an investigation. I say investigation with sarcasm, because an investigation was not done.
And we have to point out the video, this very controversial video, was never seen.
Nobody's ever seen it. So it was posted on a platform, Snapchat. I warn parents all the time about Snapchat, because the videos that are put on that platform, once they expire, they're gone forever. You can't bring them back. The FBI cannot bring those videos back.
And that was really the appeal of Snapchat when it came out, right? Is that you could send videos and pictures and they would disappear. And so that happened. I guess a student claimed they saw it. They started spreading the rumor.
Well, the claim really wasn't anything nefarious. The claim really, the student saw the video and was concerned for my son because he was playing with a gun. So the initial complaint from the student was there was concern for my child who was playing with a gun.
And just to fast forward here, you were rushed through a legal process. We'll use legal in quotes as well, into a courtroom, and eventually your son found himself in a mental facility just a short time later. How long after the initial report was your son in a mental facility?
We were less than 24 hours.
Less than 24 hours.
So, from the time that the school called me until the time we were in front of a judge was maybe 4 to 6 hours. I mean, there was not an investigation done at all.
And because, you're in front of a court with a judge, they obviously asked for the evidence, went through all of that process, right?
No, there was no evidence. There was nothing. You have to remember, this was right before Christmas. People were anxious to get out of town. They were going to spend the holidays with their families. They wanted to be with their families. And so what they wanted to do was they wanted to get rid of us so they could go spend the week with their families.
Where did your son spend the holidays?
In a mental hospital.
Wow.
They didn't violate your due process, though.
No, of course not.
Just one of many stories that we're hearing. And again, we could spend all week talking about the details there. And you are now, well, I wouldn't say just recently, but you've been telling your story, and you are full bore into this fight to see reform, as we all are. I want to shift gears here to Mandy, because as a stepmom, you kind of saw things from a little bit different perspective. But again, tell a bit of your story to those listening.
So I met Sean a few years ago, and he had a 5-year-old daughter, and I was excited because I had teenagers. And when she started coming to the house, I started seeing things that was not okay. And I told them, I was like, I really think something's going on. And when we started looking into stuff, we took her to a counselor, and of course she started disclosing things that were not okay. And of course the counselor and we had to make DHS referrals. and upwards of over 20 DHS referrals, and nothing was getting done. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. And I started doing a deep dive into it and realized that her attorney, both of her attorneys worked for DHS. They were also both assistant district attorneys. And so when you're in those capacities, you can access those records. And so when we met with, my husband and I met with Daniel Herring, which is one of the top at DHS, he said, I will let you know somebody attempted to alter records inside our files. And so then it started making sense of why there's no prosecution, there's no help for the child, there's nothing. And so we were backed against the wall because we couldn't figure out what was going on. And other DHS workers came forward and said, let me help you. And immediately they were fired. And so we thought we were like everybody else. The justice system is supposed to work in our benefit. It's supposed to protect children. It's supposed to do all this. And when we saw that it wasn't working, I started setting fire to the state because this is not okay.
Yeah. And some of these signs that you were seeing in your stepdaughter were serious.
We're very serious.
And we've talked about that. And then when I was in the Senate here in Oklahoma, that's when I first met you, started working on legislation that we didn't make it across the finish line with it, but it didn't stop you. You continued to work. I mean, you can't stop, right? I mean,
No.
you can't give up.
No.
And where does the case stand today?
So in Judge Mueller from Pottawatomie County, which just incidentally is Roberta's judge as well, when she kept coming home abused, she came home with chemical burns from Germ-X being rubbed on her face until she got second-degree burns. She came home and said that her mom had brought home dental supplies and injected her mouth with shots, pulled teeth, put spacers in the living room floor. Took a razor blade to her nail beds to get polish off because she didn't like the fact that I take her to get her nails done. And we would have to take her to the urgent care. And so Judge Mueller told my husband, if you keep taking her for help, I'm going to make sure that your custody is taken. And so she did. And so she took his custody. And then right prior to that, though, she said, my stepdad's touching me. And, of course, we had a good cry. And we did what we were supposed to do. We notified police. We notified everybody that we were supposed to. There was a VPO set, and Judge Mueller called the CAC Center and said, we're not going to do a forensic interview for sexual abuse because I don't like Dad. And so my husband talked to Ronnie Roney at the Mary Abbott House. She told him the judge has called 3 times. We've never seen this happen. We can't go forward with the forensic interview because she's interfered and we don't know what to do. And so that was when she was 7. And when she was 9, she got her first sexually transmitted infection.
Wow.
And
how old is she now?
She'll be 13. And judge put him in supervised visits because he kept taking her to the doctor.
Was there ever any, you said that the judge told you if you continue seeking help, then they'll remove visiting rights, or is that right?
Yes.
Was there an investigation? I mean, as to why you would be seeking help, why you would be bringing her to the emergency room? I mean, was there ever an investigation?
A DHS investigation. But like I said, whenever an investigation would pop up, it would get immediately smashed down, and I couldn't figure out what was going on until I realized that her attorneys were employees of DHS.
Right.
You know, and we there was a couple times when Sean actually reached out to the DHS workers and said something along with Daniel Herring in a group text, and within 5 minutes his ex had contacted him and said blah blah blah, and so we knew who the mole was.
Okay.
And so, you know, it's terrible.
Well, again, the hard thing about interviewing people that have had experience with DHS is there's so many details. And again, we could sit here all week with each one of you and flesh out all the details. But because you've been fighting it for how many years now?
Oh my gosh, since 2017.
Since 2017. And your son, Roberta, is now 18?
Yes.
18. You've been fighting this for 4 years.
Yes.
And we'll get to some of the things you've uncovered in that fight in just a second. But first, Daryl, I wanted to get your story as well. This has prompted you to again get in the fight, and you've learned and experienced so much from your first encounter with DHS. But remind me and tell the people for the first time hearing what your story is. How did it impact your family?
It's absolutely turned our family's life upside down. It's an absolute a burden. It wears you out. It financially drains you. It completely disenfranchises you to believe in justice or hope in the judicial system. I'm generally a pretty upbeat and optimistic guy, and I always give everybody, multiple chances. And you have to remember to, who am I? And my faith, resides in my Lord, not in these people that are letting me down. And it's a constant battle every day to pick yourself back up. When you see what somebody's willing to do to a child for their own benefit or for the benefit of their organization or to protect somebody they know. My son, 11 years ago, the Wings of Hope in Stillwater and a local judge made a decision to do the right thing to try and protect my child. And there was a protective order put in place for him. That judge actually passed, and the protections went away, and there was a referral made to DHS, and I was contacted and said my son's going to have to be interviewed to see what happened there. And so I was like, okay, when are you going to interview him? And they said, we'll have to let you know.
Are you able to share any details as far as where the abuse came from?
Yeah, it came from his other home.
Okay.
It was in custody exchange time to take him back. And I reached out to DHS and I said, you're telling me enough has happened to my kid that you know of, it's legitimate complaint, but you haven't interviewed him yet. And it's been a week, and I'm going to take him back to the home he's complaining of. And DHS goes, yeah, we really can't advise you not to do that. I mean, not to keep him. If you violate the court order, you'd be in contempt of court. And I said, man, I'm pretty confident that, state statute and administrative code requires you to interview him before he spends time with a person that now knows they're under investigation. And he said, I can't help you. So I had to make a decision whether I'd be in contempt of court, possibly be arrested, Who
were you talking to, a caseworker or?
Caseworker.
Okay.
And I had to take him back. And he spent that time there. An alleged abuser can't go on the property of a forensic interview situation, so they had to wait until I got him back to take him to be interviewed, and I did. When I did, a caseworker came out. He was a new caseworker, and he when he came out of the interview, he was crying, and he promised me he'd give my kid some help.
The caseworker was crying,
Yeah.
or the forensic interviewer?
The caseworker.
The caseworker.
There was a forensic specialist, child counselor that did the interview.
Okay.
And caseworker watched from behind a two-way mirror. A couple weeks went by, and I was going to take him back for exchange again. I was like, hey, what are we doing here? What's happening here? I haven't seen any help. I haven't seen any plan. Like, what are you guys going to do? And I'm in the same boat I was in. Do I have to take him back? And they said, well, we can't advise you not to. You're going to have to take him back. So I had to take him back. And I got a really nasty letter in the mail. They had unsubstantiated, and they had notified a former stepdad instead of me of the unsubstantiation. I never got notified of what DHS did. So I reached out to DHS and I said, hey, a former stepdad got a notification. I've got a notification. What are you doing for my kid? And they just said, well, we can't talk to you anymore. Well, because he had been engaged at what's called the Seville Center, it's a Child Advocacy Center in Stillwater, he was allowed counseling there as well. And the counselor notified me, you have to re-engage DHS. You have to share what your child's sharing. So I did. I re-notified, and I didn't hear anything for 3 months.
Nothing. No reply to an email, a voicemail.
Absolutely nothing. I got online. I'm looking at I do the complaint form online. I asked to talk to the supervisor. I said that person's supervisor. I said that person's supervisor. Nobody ever called me back. So I started going up the chain of command at the close to the Capitol there, DHS building. And finally, this lady calls me and she says, "Mr. Dougherty, I'm Amy Whitson. What can I do for you?" And I tell her exactly what I just told you. And she said, "We've reviewed your case and your child made no disclosures." I said, "If my child made no disclosures, then why was the caseworker crying when he came out?" "Well, I don't know about that. He's not a caseworker anymore."
Was anything recorded?
Well, so I reached back out to the Seville Center and I said, "Hey, I need to know who the officer was that was there to see if there's going to be a police report." And they said, "Well, there was no officer." I said, "Well, no, they're supposed to invite the officer." So then I get a call from the local office, and the case worker, who's not a caseworker anymore, is on the line with the director. And I recorded this conversation, by the way. And they said, "Mr. Dougherty, I need to tell you, if you make any more complaints to the hotline, we're going to report you for felony false reporting." And I said, "You told me you heard my son make complaints." He said, and the caseworker was clearly already instructed. Like, there was already a plan. And I said, "So it's not a false complaint. I haven't made a false complaint because you told me he disclosed, but Amy Whitson said he didn't disclose." Long story short, former Representative John Talley is from my area. I didn't know. He made a complaint to the Oklahoma Commission on Children and Youth, who is the oversight of DHS, looks into DHS, checks the case. While that happened, and there was another call into Oklahoma DHS, I was not notified. I was not told about it. A DHS caseworker randomly reaches out on a Friday and says, "I'm going to be at your house in an hour to talk to you about your son's case." And I said, "What case?" So she comes to my house and she goes, "Look, we've interviewed your child again. He made some complaints about some inappropriate touching, but nothing to the extent that you said from the first time." I said, "It wasn't anything I said from the first time. He gave his own forensic interview." She said, "He made no disclosures." I said, "Did you see it?" She said, "No." This lady told me, a mom tickling a little boy's genitals isn't a concern for DHS, so don't bring that up again. And I said, "When is my son going in for his forensic interview?" And she said, "Well, he's already been in for his forensic interview." I said, "Are you kidding me? Who took him in?" And she said, "Well, we're not going to talk about that." And she moved on. So I called the Seville Center again and I said, "Hey, was my kid in for a forensic interview, and can he have counseling now again? Like, can we get him some help?" So they did. They started counseling with him again. They were really awesome. And I said, "Who was the officer there?" And they said, "There was no officer here."
Wow.
I'm like, what's going on? A year later, a third time, a call was made in. This time, the interview was actually done while he sat on his mom's lap. I got a letter from the director of the Seville Center that said, "Mr. Dougherty, I think you should subpoena your son's forensic interviews, and I think you should ask the police department why there's never been a police officer at any of his forensic interviews." So that has spiraled worse, not better. The city attorney for the city of Stillwater walked across the street to my business, handed me an envelope that had the OCCY report in it, said, "It's illegal for me to give you this. I'm going to have to resign my position, but you deserve to have
Wow.
it." I opened that document. I was shaking, and the OCCY wrote that not only did they not investigate my son's concerns, they never even wrote them down.
What?
Never even wrote them down. So they kept lying, even in court, multiple court hearings, saying my son never made any, but they never even wrote them down, so they couldn't have investigated them. So I have this OCCY report. So I have 3 cases in the Oklahoma Supreme Court and 1 in a district court, and DHS attorney John Langford, one of their lead litigators, continually places fraud in the court, stating, "We have thoroughly investigated all of this, and there has never been any credible complaints from the child.
Wow.
Even though they have the OCCY report that states they never even wrote it down.
Wow.
So
Did
that's my case. That's where I'm at. And
how many years has this been going on, Daryl?
11 years.
11 years.
11 years.
11 years.
11 years.
I'm so sorry. How old is your son now?
11 and a half.
Did you personally ever have a chance to talk with your son about this? And you can disclose however much you can disclose. I know you have pending cases and everything, but just curious, in your own personal conversations with your son, was he ever able to talk about it, or can you talk about it?
I can talk about some of it. There was a period of about 3 years when he was first learning to speak, where the counselors at the Still Center were trying to teach him how to defend himself, stand up for himself, where he became extremely verbal. He became extremely, I read this. I thought I was supposed to be able to say no, and it was supposed to be no, right? And he would say, "Daddy, how come you're not helping me?" You know, and you can't help. So we had OCCY even described the intervention they did with the Payne County DHS, where they instructed all of them their failures. Following that instructive hearing they had with all of those workers, came to court within a month of that and lied and said nobody had ever told them there were any issues with their investigations, and that they still stand by that they were thorough investigations. At that point, my son went silent because he was forced into, he said he just wanted to live with his daddy, and his stomach hurts when he has to go to his other home, but he doesn't want to say why. And after that, he knew not to talk because he was afraid it'd get worse. This last year, he was deemed to be mature and articulate enough to speak on behalf of himself, and he did. And the courts still said they needed to go with the fraudulent statements of the DHS workers to determine where he should land. So we're fighting in court because he deserves an advocate.
Yes, he does.
Wow, there's so many commonalities between these stories. And it's never everything I've ever looked into about DHS. It's never just DHS coming down as really a completely unaccountable entity reaching into somebody's family. It's layers of government that just keep building.
Now, let's start with it. Completely unaccountable.
Completely.
So qualify that. I mean, how are they completely unaccountable?
Well, DHS has been sued many, many times, and no one's been a family's never been successful in a suit against DHS. So they are essentially, by state law, indemnified in their actions, which is incredibly frustrating for families. But when you see the way that this happens, where a family's most fundamental right is taken away, the right to raise your own children, they can reach into your family, take your child, and they can keep your child. It's not just DHS. You see, it's the overlap of courts. It's the overlap of NGOs that work with them in all of these forensic interviewing. I had the privilege of telling Roberta's story with her son, and it was the school system. The school system, the day before this incident happened, had put out a warning about some kind of a social media trend that had to do with guns. So everybody was heightened, and then all of a sudden this happens. So you saw that coming in. Law enforcement is a big part of this. There's a lot of confusion about what law enforcement should be doing and should not be doing, and they are sometimes complicit with this, and then sometimes prevented from doing their jobs with this.
For the viewers, NGO.
Oh, a non-governmental organization, which ironically is usually funded with governmental money.
Yes.
Right.
But yes, so those are places that do forensic interviewing, counseling, those kind of things. It all works together, and they're all on the side of sort of proving the parent wrong. And in a system that was created to keep kids safe, and it's making kids very unsafe.
Well, the children learn to recant their stories for survival or abuse. I've got over 200 hours now of child abuse training because of this. I'm a certified forensic interviewer. I have training in pedophilia and grooming through OCCY. I have training through APSAC, the American Professional Society of Abused Children. And I did all this because I couldn't understand what was going on. And the fact is, and I have a certification in recantation, and children recant for two reasons: survival or guilt. So you either guilt trip them, hey, now this person has to go away and we can't pay our bills and we can't eat and you can't have all these nice things, or survival. I have to stay there. The abuse is going to get worse. But if I keep my mouth shut and I recant, the abuse doesn't get worse and maybe it gets better. And so that's what we see a lot of. We see them recant for survival, mostly over guilt. That's what happened with Sean's daughter. He backed off and he was like, I'm going to back off. So maybe the abuse will calm down. And she eventually recanted to a therapist and said none of that was true. Even though in her testimony to Senator Shane Jett, she said, my mom's forcing me into the shower with my stepdad and I have to do nothing but look away because I can't take it.
Wow. When you hear, Mandy, when you hear Daryl's story as a certified forensic interviewer, what stands out to you?
The fact that, first of all, they didn't write anything down. Second of all, they didn't bring in law enforcement. And third of all, they completely failed the child. And they did it on state grants and funds and all the things, right? So they're, in my eye, they just embezzled all this money to keep their operations going, but they're not helping the kids. In fact, he's worse off than if they would have never done one, because by the third forensic interview, he's sitting on mommy's lap and she's bouncing him. And as he'll tell you in the police report, the police is in one of his reports, they're writing down mom's facial expressions as the kid's disclosing. And so it's a complete failure everywhere. It's a failure all the way across the state. And one of the big things going on right now is mental health in the state and how we're 100 million and blah, blah, blah. We're going to need mental health. They're not helping these kids. The kids are, and I said this when I go speak about this. You see ideologies. You see a girl wanting to be a boy wanting to be a girl, a kid wanting to be a cat. Those ideologies come because they've been perpetrated on and abused so long. They don't want to identify as that person. Wow. I know trans kids right now that said, my childhood was so horrific that I no longer want to be little Tommy. I'm now Jill.
Wow. It's their only way probably to have a fresh start.
Right.
Wow. Roberta, whenever the incident happened with you in a matter of hours, I just can't believe the timeline there from the accusation to his institution. You had a caseworker come to your house, and what were they looking for? I want to spend a little bit of time on some of these different levels. We need to talk about judges. We need to talk about the relationship with law enforcement, DAs, but oftentimes that point of first contact is the caseworker. I know for you, you went to the law, you had encounters with the law enforcement and then the judge and then the caseworker. But if we could just start just a little bit with the caseworker, what was your experience with the caseworker coming to your home?
Well, Jake, what I want to say is my experience when I hear these other cases with these other children and these families that have been fighting for years and years and years and still don't have their kids. I mean, my heart just breaks for them. Right. Because it makes what we went through seem so small. And so
it was inexcusable. 14 days in a mental hospital.
Yes.
With no due process, but yes, absolutely.
But that's what drives me to do what I do, because I hear these people and I hear these stories and I see these children that are still not at home. They're still suffering, and I can stand up and I can have a voice for them. That's what I can do. And so my first interaction with DHS, they came to my house. She came to my house right when I got home from court. She was at my house. She came with the sheriff's department. She had 2 deputies with her. And
it's interesting. I'll just stop here. The contrast between this situation and yours, Daryl, where they didn't investigate. They took, months, weeks before they would ever take action? Is that what?
The first thing I heard was that DHS asked them not to come. That was my response when I first reached out to them.
DHS asked the caseworker not to come?
DHS asked the Stillwater Police Department not to come.
Okay, wow. And then on this side, and this is one of the things that I think makes this whole thing so hard to grab a hold of is from case to case, it varies. Different types of injustice. Here we have an unsubstantiated claim about a video that was never seen, yet within a matter of hours, DHS is on your doorstep, investigating your home.
Right. And so it was the original deputy, the investigator investigating my case, that filed the DHS complaint. And he filed it as a priority 1 case. That means that this is the worst abuse possible. The caseworker has an hour to make contact with my family that my child is in immediate danger. And that's what that priority 1 means. And so this investigator, my son was such a danger to my family that he was a priority 1 case. And so she came to my house. 2 deputies came in with her. They came in my house. One of the orders from the judge was that I had to remove all of the firearms from my home before my son could even step foot back in my home. And so, I called somebody and had them go to my house and remove all of the firearms. And so they were there to make sure there was not one firearm in my home. And once they were, once they looked around, seeing I didn't have any firearms, then they left. The caseworker came in. She talked to my children. First, she talked to me and she talked to my son, and she didn't know I had a daughter. And the only way she knew I had a daughter is my daughter had to use the restroom, and she came out of her bedroom. And when she came out of her bedroom, the look on her face, this caseworker's face, and she said, "You have a daughter?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." So she didn't even know I had a daughter. And
what's significant about that?
Nobody did due diligence is what's significant about it. This case was so rushed. Nobody even looked into who all was in my home. Nobody looked into what was going on in my home, and so she was in my house for hours and didn't even know I had a daughter. That's what's significant about that.
Yeah, you've heard her story thoroughly, Katy, and you've worked with DHS before. You've reported on them extensively. When you hear what she just described about the level 1, did you say a level 1 case?
Priority 1.
What's your response to that?
So DHS cases are either a P1, priority 1, or priority 2, and it's 24 hours. They have 24 hours that they actually have to lay eyes by law on that child and start to assess the situation. When I hear all of these, I'm amazed, because Title 10A is the state statute that governs all of child welfare services and is supposed to keep our rights intact. They cannot just come in and grab our children unless it meets these specific standards. And then there are literally thousands of pages of policy that dictate what every single worker, whether it's the CPS worker, that's child protection, comes in first to investigate. If a child's taken into custody, then there's a permanency worker. There are thousands of pages of policy. They're all out there online that interpret Title A law and say, this is what you can do and this is what you can't do and this is what you have to do in DHS. There are so many things that are wrong here in these 3 stories. It's amazing what's wrong in these 3 stories. It's almost as though nobody ever consulted the book. And DHS has really extensive training for new workers. They find out all of this. They are supposed to be steeped in knowing we're here to help this family and correct these conditions, make sure things are safe. That's not what I'm hearing at all with these, or in the story that we put out about Lincoln Lockman this week. They aren't following the law. The courts are not following the law.
Well, that's what we said earlier, is it not, Daryl? I mean, not that we need new laws.
Right.
We just need the people
Exactly.
to follow the law.
Yes.
Right. We have a lot of hurt families saying we got to go pound the doors down at the legislator, and no, you actually don't. Title 10A actually has a really good statute in it, and it defines the multidisciplinary teams that are supposed to be enacted if there's a credible concern for a child. And the NGOs you're talking about are listed in there. Law enforcement's listed in there. And it's interesting. It rolls off our tongue so easy when we say Oklahoma DHS came and investigated. We actually are so ingrained to think that's appropriate that when it comes off our tongue, we don't recognize that's illegal. DHS can't investigate. Why does the DHS not have a chain of evidence? Why does DHS not have it? They're not investigators. They're not law enforcement. The multidisciplinary team statute is very clear. If there's a credible complaint, you notify law enforcement. Law enforcement comes in and does the investigation, right? If there's a concern for the child's well-being, mental well-being, and they need therapeutic help, counseling, you bring in a counselor, a child counselor, a forensic interview, depending on what the piece is. You do not have DHS interview that child. That's illegal. If that child has, we hear all of these time, the DHS worker make a diagnosis of a health issue. That's illegal. You bring in a doctor. So we hear all the time we don't have enough DHS workers, and everybody has their own opinion about that. My opinion about that is if DHS does what Title 10A multidisciplinary statute allows them to do, which is actually just coordinate the information from the experts and hand it to the DA, we can eliminate 75% of the staff in DHS, and we can allocate that funding where it needs to be allocated. But when you ask a DHS worker to be a lawyer, a doctor, a counselor, a law enforcement, they're going to make mistakes. They're going to break the law. And the next thing they have to do is come to court and figure out a way to cover it up. And that's the next piece we were talking about.
It is.
100%. Yeah. The caseworker, just kind of hang on to that one because we're going to wrap this conversation up and go to part 2. So you guys are going to have to hang on because we'll have part 2 released where we'll dig into the judicial aspect of this and the role of law enforcement. And like you said, that multidisciplinary team that's supposed to be involved. I want to dig deeper into that. But what is the role of the caseworker showing up on site? You've got quite a bit of experience as a certified forensic interviewer. What should the caseworker be looking for if they show up like they did on Roberta's doorstep? And what should be the response if they see something concerning? Whoever wants to jump on that one.
Well, I mean, state law defines what constitutes a imminent risk of harm to a child. And if it doesn't meet that threshold, they are not supposed to be involved. They can offer services, which are completely voluntary on the family's part. What we see is them crossing that line and ignoring that law a lot of the times, and just being heavy-handed. Humans who have so much power over other humans, and when government grows and those layers grow, they start to really step on people's rights. The strange thing is, too, child welfare services is kind of a new thing. It's only been around for, about 50 years. In about the 70s, the states were passing these laws, putting child welfare systems into their states. Before that, churches dealt with these things. We had different services in the community. Once it became a government thing, it became very heavy-handed. And Oklahoma is not the only state to sort of struggle with this heavy-handedness. But the funny thing is, like you're saying about law enforcement, now that DHS is involved, particularly where child sexual abuse comes into play, where they're mandated by law that if a crime occurred, they're supposed to turn that over to law enforcement. They're supposed to report that, and that's supposed to be prosecuted. That's not happening.
Right.
And a lot of the proliferation of child sexual abuse in our state is because that's not happening. DHS has got it. We're going to put a plan in place, and we're not seeing the prosecutions on those cases that we should. Child sexual abuse is being minimized by the system, not eliminated.
Right.
I can vouch for that in our personal testimony with my daughter that we eventually adopted. We fostered for 2 years. We, in the first few weeks, saw some things that were concerning that we felt pointed to sexual abuse. And we reported that to our caseworker. The response was, oh, that's normal. And I mean, it's stuff that I'm not even comfortable sharing here on camera.
Right.
It was not normal. And so we called the hotline, and it took a while to get them to take it serious. So I think that, like you said, it's being minimized. And I question whether many of those in the system have actually come from the system and do not know what a healthy home looks like, or what healthy sexual interaction looks like, healthy boundaries look like. And that's very concerning. They may have got their sociology degree, but what qualifies them when they come to a home to know if there's sexual abuse going on, any kind of abuse, or if there is imminent risk for the child, like you said. We're gonna wrap up this conversation and jump to part 2 next time. We'll dig into the judicial aspect of this, the multidisciplinary teams, and how this thing should be happening. It's interesting you bring up a good point that we've kind of accepted this as the norm, but DHS hasn't been around that long.
Right.
And like you said, Daryl, when we talk about certain things like DHS investigating, we've kind of become accustomed to that. So where have we just accepted things that really should not be accepted? And what's the first step to change? That's the goal of Drill Baby Drill, is to dive down deep and discover the answer. So we'll have part 2 of this conversation where we're going to dig into it and try to find an answer to this very complicated issue.
Baby drill.